The last thing that we're going to cover in topic 2.2 is finding x and y intercepts and using your intercepts to graph. So your x-intercept is your x value when y equals 0. So in other words, when you write it as a point, you have x and then 0. It's also, if you look at your graph, where your line crosses the x-axis. Your y-intercept is your y value when x is 0. When you write it as a point, it would look like 0 and then your y-coordinate. If you're looking at your line, it's where your line crosses the y-axis. I like to think of these as my zeros because your magic number here to find your intercepts is 0. So on these next problems, we're going to be finding our intercepts and using them to graph. So on question 1, I'm going to start by finding my x-intercept, then my y-intercept, and then I'll use those to graph. So to find the x-intercept, remember y is equal to 0. So all you have to do is plug in 0 for y in your equation. So I get 3x plus 6. I'm going to plug in 0 for y. 6 times 0 is 0. So this really disappears and we're left with 3x equals 24. If you divide by 3, x is 8. So my x-intercept is 8, 0. That means that when we're sketching our graph, it crosses the x-axis at 8. So I'm going to put a dot at 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Next, I'm going to find my y-intercept. When you find your y-intercept, this time x equals 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for x in my equation. So my equation becomes 3 times 0 plus 6y equals 24. Since 3 times 0 is 0, this disappears. And we have 6y is 24. If we divide by 6, y equals positive 4. If you write that as a point, it's 0, 4. So my y-intercept is at 4. So on your y-axis, you would put a point at 4. And then you can sketch your line through these 2 points. Our next problem is going to do the same steps. So to find our x-intercept, we're going to plug in 0 for y. So our 3y disappears and we're left with 2x equals 6. So for this problem, our x-intercept is 3 or 3, 0 if you're writing it as a point. So on your x-axis, you would go to 3 and put a point there. To find the y-intercept, we're going to plug in 0 for x. So in my equation, it becomes 2 times 0 minus 3y equals 6. And my 2 times 0 disappears. I have negative 3y equals 6. If I divide by negative 3, my y-intercept is at negative 2. If you're writing it as a point, you would write 0, negative 2. So I'm going to go to my y-axis and put a point at negative 2. And now I can sketch my line through my 2 points. Our next problems are written in slope-intercept form. If you noticed, the first 2 were in standard form. So these next 2 are in slope-intercept form. We're still going to graph using the intercepts. So I'm going to start with my x-intercept, or plugging in 0 for y. Since this one's written differently, my steps are going to look a little different. Here I have an equation I need to solve for x. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. I get 4 equals negative 2x, and then I can divide by negative 2. So my x-intercept's at negative 2. If you write that at as a point, it's negative 2, 0. So I'm going to graph my x-intercept at negative 2. Now I'm going to find my y-intercept. In other words, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. This one's easier because negative 2 times 0 is 0, so that disappears. And all that's left is y equals negative 4. If you write this as a point, it's 0, negative 4. So on your y-axis, you could put a point at -4 and then connect your 2 points to form your line. This last problem, we're going to start with our x-intercept. We're plugging in 0 for y. I'm going to solve for x, so I would do -3. And then I would divide by 2. -3 divided by 2 is -1.5. So my x-intercept is at -1.50. When I graph that point, it's going to be between -1 and -2. Now I'm going to find my y-intercept. In other words, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So I have y equals 2 times 0 plus 3. Since 2 times 0 is 0, that disappears. My y-intercept is +3. If you write that as a point, it's 0, 3. So you can go to your y-axis and put a dot at 3. And now we can connect our 2 points. So when you're graphing using intercepts, remember your magic number 0. You plug in 0 into the opposite letter and solve for your intercept. Once you have your x-intercept, graph that on the x-axis, your y-intercept goes on the y-axis, and then you can sketch your line by connecting those points.